When parents ask their children how their day at school was, they expect all sorts of answers. It was fun. It was boring. They fell out with someone. The usual stuff. However, one thing they probably don't anticipate is for their kid to come home and say they met their twin. So you can imagine one mom's surprise when this is what her son told her after school one day. He even had photo evidence to back up his claim, something that caught his mother completely off guard. Could what he was saying actually be true? Being a single mom can be incredibly tough. When you don't have a partner to lean on and help you with the ups and downs of raising a child, life can get overwhelming at times. However, seeing the smile on your kid's face can go a long way to making all the hard work worthwhile. As a single mom herself, Janice understood the difficulties of trying to raise a child with one pair of hands. She was willing to take all the bad with the good, though, because she loved her son like nothing else. There was no one in the world who surprised her more, as evidenced by what happened after school one day. Janice and her 8-year-old son, Luke, had a well-established routine during the week. They'd wake up early, get him ready for school, then she would work at a bookstore while he was in class. After work, she'd pick him up, they'd walk home together, and then Janice would make Luke dinner while he did homework and played with his toys. It was a simple routine that rarely threw up anything unexpected. That was until the pair got home one day, and Luke began talking about a boy in his school. It seems he'd made a new friend and was excited to tell his mom all about it. However, there was a particular reason Luke was so excited. It appears the boy Luke met bore quite a striking resemblance to him, at least from his perspective. According to him, they had the same hair and eyes, prompting Luke to declare that he had a twin. It was a word that caught Janice off guard because it's not like kids go around saying such things very often. The single mom wasn't entirely sure what to make of her son's apparent new discovery. However, she saw no reason to just shoot down the idea and tell Luke he was wrong. If this was simply his imagination running wild, he would soon move on to something else and forget this ever happened. So why not just indulge him? Janice had no idea what this other kid from school looked like, so she couldn't exactly give her opinion on whether he and her son bore any resemblance. However, almost like Luke had anticipated this, he swiftly made another announcement. It seems that he had a picture taken earlier that day of him and his supposed twin. The teacher had apparently snapped the shot for him so that he could show his brother off to his mom. He presented it to Janice, and that's when her son's story suddenly took on a whole new light. Looking at the two boys together, she couldn't deny that there were definitely similarities between the two kids. Were they actually twins? As Luke's mother, you might think that she would know if he had a twin brother out there or not. However, Janice didn't actually give birth to her little boy. It seems that she adopted the child during a low point in her life, and he soon proved to be the light in her life that she'd been needing. So, for all she knew, her kid could have a sibling out there that she'd never met before. What were the chances of finding out about him this way, though? Well, stranger things have happened, and there was no confirmation that the two were indeed related yet. Perhaps the similarities in their appearance were just a coincidence. If Luke did indeed have a twin, it would potentially raise some awkward questions with the people around her. After all, there weren't many who actually knew the boy was adopted. Those closest to her knew the truth, but other friends and moms from school just assumed their connection was biological. It helped that they shared similar features. Janice had never intended to mislead people in this way. However, Luke had come along after a miscarriage and divorce. So when people mistakenly believed that she'd given birth to him, she wanted to believe that had really happened. If it weren't for this supposed twin, Janice might have fooled herself into believing it was true. After Luke showed Janice the picture, she agreed they looked alike and said it was amazing that he had a twin to spend time with in school. This seemed to satisfy her boy, who went off to play while she thought about what she'd just discovered. There was no way she could forget what she'd seen. How could she go about getting the answers she needed, though? Her first port of call was the teacher who had taken Luke's picture that day. Janice had her contact information, so she figured that a quick call would shed some light on the situation. However, there was only so much the woman could tell her about someone else's child.
Also, if you have not done so already, please subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell to get inspired by these real-life stories every day. Now, back to the story.
Although Luke's teacher was careful with the details that she shared, she did provide Janice with the boy's name, Leon Martin. It was a step in the right direction that would hopefully bring her closer to finding out whether her son was actually a twin or not. However, there wasn't much more Janice could do that day. Sleep did not come easy that night, with Janice's thoughts running wild for hours. Before she knew it, the next day had arrived, and it was time to continue the usual routine. Rather than going straight to work after dropping Luke off at school, though, she decided to call the adoption agency that had handled her case. Janice knew that the chances of her getting information about someone else's child from the adoption agency were pretty low. However, there was always a possibility, especially if Luke and Leon were blood relatives. Unfortunately, as expected, the agency was reluctant to give her any of the information that she required, leaving her no closer to the truth. Trying to get through her shift wasn't easy that day, but Janice had something to look forward to afterward: Luke's dance class. Watching him let loose and have fun always put a smile on her face, and it would prove to be a great distraction. Little did she know, though, that Leon and his family would also be there. It was clear to Janice as soon as the class started who Leon was. Even from a distance, the resemblance between him and Luke seemed pretty clear. Did Leon's parents notice too? If so, they didn't appear to acknowledge it. Janice watched when the boy approached them at the end of the class, but they never looked her way. The single mom knew that the best way to clear everything up in her mind was to speak to Leon's parents. However, with this being such a delicate subject, she didn't want to upset them. Perhaps it would be better to just push her suspicions to the back of her mind and forget that her son might have a twin. Trying to ignore the possibility of her son having a twin brother seemed to work for a few days. However, the following week, Luke came home with something that gave Janice a questionable idea. It seems that he and Leon had secretly cut a small chunk of their hair off and given the strands to one another. This was apparently their way of strengthening the bond between them as twin brothers. When Janice saw the boy's hair, a thought occurred to her. What if I use this for a DNA test? She knew it wasn't an appropriate thing to do, but it would finally clear up whether the boys were related or not. It didn't feel good taking some of Leon's hair that Luke had brought back and shipping it off for testing with her son's own DNA sample. However, she just had to tell herself she was doing this with good intentions. If the results confirmed a match, then Janice could tell her boy he really did have a twin brother. Unfortunately, getting the answers that she wanted wasn't a quick process. It was several weeks of waiting to hear back about Luke and Leon's relationship. She tried to get on with daily life during that time, but it wasn't easy. The stress of not knowing the truth started getting to her more and more with each passing day. The desire to know the truth really had Janice on edge as she waited eagerly for the results to arrive. However, once she had the letter in her hand, she somehow felt worse. The answers were inside that envelope, but could she bring herself to look at them, given the potential impact they could have? Yes, she had to. She'd come this far, so she couldn't back out now. That didn't mean Janice was prepared for what was written on the paper in front of her, though. The DNA between Luke and Leon was a match. They were twins. As Janice read the words, she cycled through many different emotions, unsure exactly what to think. Although the news was a lot to process, Janice was ultimately happy with the revelation about Luke and Leon. Knowing that her boy had a twin brother out there was a real comfort. It meant that he had someone to be there for him when she couldn't. And that thought filled her heart with so much love. She was eager to tell Leon's family and hopefully start to build a relationship between them. However, Janice had to tread carefully. There was no knowing how they'd react to the news, especially given how Janice had gone about finding out the truth. If she put a foot wrong, she could end up driving a wedge between them. Before she could go telling another family about what she discovered, she had to be honest with her son. After all, this directly involved him and would change his life forever. Janice was a little nervous about breaking the news, unsure if he would truly grasp the enormity of this revelation. However, she was sure he'd be delighted. To Luke, the day he found out probably seemed like any other for the most part. He woke up in the morning, went to school, and walked home afterward with his mom. He had no idea that she'd made such a significant discovery until she sat him down when they returned home and revealed the truth. Despite Janice's concerns about how her son would handle the news, everything went incredibly smoothly. Luke listened to what she had to say, just about managing to contain his excitement as she confirmed his relationship with Leon. He was overjoyed to learn that this kid from his school really was his twin, and they would be bonded for life. After Janice was done telling him everything, Luke wanted to know when he could tell Leon the good news. She wasn't sure how to answer that question, but asked that he wait until she'd spoken to his parents. It was probably better they heard about this from her than from their kid after school one day. How do you tell a couple that you've never spoken to before that both of your kids are twins? For all Janice knew, Leon hadn't said a word to his parents about Luke, so they potentially didn't even know that the boys had already thought of themselves as brothers. She had to be very careful with every move she made. The single mom ultimately decided to reach out and call the adoption agency again, hopeful that things would go better this time. Rather than seeking information about Leon's family, she wanted the agency to help her make contact with the Martins. She was hopeful that the DNA results would sway things in her favor with them. The adoption agency had been very closed off the last time that Janice contacted them. This time around, though, they were more open to her suggestions. They agreed to get in contact with the family and would report back to her with what they had to say. Finally, it felt like the single mom was getting somewhere. When the agency eventually contacted her again, they came with good and bad news. The good news was that the family was willing to hear what Janice had to say. The bad news was that they were more comfortable getting it in a letter than speaking to her in person. Luckily, Luke's mom was willing to do as they wished. The great thing about writing a letter is that it gives you time to think your words through and make sure that you don't say something you'll regret immediately after. However, that doesn't mean writing to Leon's family was a walk in the park for Janice. She spent a long time just sitting there, trying to find the right words. After a lot of thinking and some inspiration from Luke, though, she finally managed to put pen to paper. She explained the last few weeks to Leon's parents and apologized for her actions. Janice also stated that she hoped the boys could have the opportunity to strengthen their bond as brothers, even if she had crossed the line. Once Janice handed the letter to the adoption agency, she knew that all she could do was wait. Even though Luke and Leon would see one another at school the next day, her son had made a pinky promise not to say anything about what he'd learned. They would wait until the Martins hopefully came to them. Just like with the DNA test results, the wait for a response from Leon's parents was excruciating. The more days that passed, the more Janice feared they wanted nothing to do with her. She could handle them hating her, but she would be devastated if her actions stopped the boys from getting to grow up as brothers. At one point, Janice feared that she and Luke would never receive a response from the Martin family. However, just when it seemed like everything was falling apart, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwritten address on the front instantly made it clear that this was not a bill or anything like that. It was something personal. Janice opened it up to find a few pieces of paper filled with neat handwriting courtesy of Leon's mother. She apologized for the lateness of her reply and explained that she and her husband needed time to get their heads around everything. However, after thinking things through, they agreed that their sons deserved to have a relationship as brothers. In the letter, Leon's mother suggested that the two families meet up somewhere. Although their sons already knew one another, it seemed fitting that they make an occasion of all of them coming together for the first time. She included contact details in the letter that Janice could use to save them from relying on the mail. The single mom wasted no time sending a message to Leon's mom, thanking her for the letter and agreeing to an in-person meeting. After a brief correspondence, they settled on a trip to the local park at the weekend. That was only a few days away, and neither Luke nor Janice could contain their excitement. As excited as the mom and son were in the lead up to this family reunion, they were also full of questions. Luke, in particular, had a lot he wanted answers to. For one, he didn't quite understand why he and Leon hadn't grown up with the same parents. He got that he was adopted, but why were the brothers separated? Janice couldn't answer that because she was oblivious herself. She'd never heard anything about her boy having a twin when she became his mom. Were Leon's family in the same position as her when they adopted their boy, or did they know a side to the story that Janice and Luke had never been privy to? It was a sunny day when Janice and Luke headed for the park, something the mom hoped was a sign of things to come. She was incredibly nervous about meeting Leon's family for the first time, and those feelings only intensified when Luke spotted his brother on the swings. However, Janice quickly relaxed when she watched the boys playing together. It helped that Leon's parents appeared to be an incredibly kind and loving couple. Neither side mentioned Janice's questionable behavior when searching for the truth, instead focusing on how nice it was to know their son had a brother in the world. They agreed that this would bond their families together forever, so there was no point in keeping secrets. During the meeting with Leon's parents, the couple shared with Janice what they knew about their son's past. They revealed that they'd known about him having a brother, but they'd only been allowed to adopt one sibling because the birth mom wished to keep the other boy. Evidently, this was a decision that she soon changed her mind about. The couple had never forgotten about the brother and were always a little afraid that the birth mom would come along and want her other baby back. That's why they were a little freaked out when the adoption agency reached out, saying Luke's mom wished to speak with them. After receiving Janice's letter, though, they soon calmed down. Both sides had been worried about what this discovery would mean for their families. However, after that first meeting in the park, it became clear that the revelation brought nothing but joy their way. The families quickly started spending more time with one another until it was like they had always been in each other's lives. Meanwhile, the relationship between the brothers continued to grow and solidify into an unbreakable bond. Janice was incredibly proud to see the love between these two and was so grateful that everything had worked out for the best. While things might have come about in an unusual manner, she wouldn't have changed anything for the world.